It was another long day at the Fernie Museum, and I was up in my office doing what I do best, combining cold, hard liquor with cold, hard facts. The suspect was a seal press, about 24.6 centimeters high, with red dragons painted on the sides. The donation invoice said it was for the Anglo-Canadian Savings and Trust, donated by the BC government in 1983. To the untrained eye, it looked like just another innocent piece of obsolete early 20th century office equipment, but something didn't sit right. In all my years digging through dusty newspapers and obscure databases, I had never heard of a bank by that name. I looked through the archives, pored through directories, but nothing came up. Then, on a whim, I searched UBC's open collections, and suddenly the whole grubby, sordid tale came oozing to the surface. Turns out there was a good reason there were no records for the Anglo-Canadian Savings and Trust. It had never existed, except in the twisted imaginations of three very bad men. In December of 1912, Edward Williams, James Davidson, and Frederick Victor Peacock incorporated a new company in Vancouver and called it the Anglo-Canadian Savings and Trust Company Limited. 2 months later, in February 1913, Davidson, Williams, and Peacock arrived in Coleman, Alberta, and immediately set up business. They rented an office from the Coleman Realty Company and installed fixtures and a bank counter, paying for all the woodwork, painting, and repairs on credit. Then they hit the town. Davidson was the salesman, and Williams and Peacock promoted the business to anyone who would listen, promising 20% interest on investment in stock and 4% on checking accounts. Shares were sold at $10 a pop. To those who were unsure, they promised to buy back stock from dissatisfied stockholders at an increase of 50%. Within weeks, they had sold over $4,000 worth of stock in Coleman and large amounts in Bellevue and other towns in the Crow's Nest Pass. They were so convincing that some people withdrew all of their savings from the Bank of Commerce and deposited them straight into the waiting hands of the Anglo-Canadian Savings and Trust. As the weeks passed, keen observers noticed that they spent little time actually running the bank and a lot of time in local bars and bordellos in Coleman's red light district, spending wildly on girls and expensive liquor. Unfortunately for Peacock, Davidson, and Williams, some of those keenly observing were the Royal Northwest Mounted Police. Somehow, the three caught wind that the boys in red serge were interested in their operation, and not just to sock away something for retirement. They immediately packed up and skipped town with $4,000 worth of swindled cash. Within a week, they'd resurfaced, just across the BC border in the Elk Valley, and set the game up again. This time, they bought offices on the bottom floor of the Eckstein Block, a fine building on 5th Street, and painted the words 4% in big numerals on the windows. They opened for business on April 1st. Not grasping the irony, the suckers and their cash came rolling in. The Savings and Trust's favorite prey were widows and other working-class people living on a shoestring, who didn't necessarily know much about banking and whose poverty could make them more likely to hope for big returns on a risky investment. One was Julia Kolbus, the wife of a coal dumper at the Michelle Tipple, who the three convinced to sign a check for $800. But Kolbus was a sharper customer than they'd bargained for. Sensing something was wrong, she canceled the check. When the money didn't go through, the trio took it as their cue to leave. They'd squeezed everything they could from the Elk Valley, and with the Mounties and the local constabulary closing in, they decided to make a break across the border for Spokane, hoping to outrun the law long enough to disappear into Washington state. But for all their double dealing, they hadn't accounted for one thing: Edwardian technology. Maybe they could outrun the police, but no one could outrun the telegraph. Within hours, a telegram arrived at the office of Chief of Police W.J. Doust from the Chief Constable of Fernie, describing the men and their crimes, and saying that warrants had been issued for their arrest. The detectives of Spokane went to work. Peacock was arrested at 6 p.m. on Saturday, April 12th, and agreed to go back to Canada without extradition. Williams and Davidson were picked up at 11 p.m. while crossing Riverside Avenue. When their rooms were searched, the police found trunks and suitcases stuffed with bank deeds, stock certificates, stamps, and presumably one very heavy cast-iron steel press with little red dragons painted on the sides. Edward Williams tried to plead innocence, claiming that the whole thing was a horrible mistake. The three men were thrown into the cells and stayed there until Monday morning, when policemen from Fernie arrived to march them back across the border. In total, they'd stolen a cool $15,000 from the good citizens of the Elk Valley and the Crow's Nest Pass, and all three were headed for hard time, but one had other ideas. It turns out that Frederick Victor wasn't a peacock after all, but a pigeon. A stool pigeon, to be precise. On May 12th, he paid his $3,000 bail and turned witness for the prosecution. With Peacock's enthusiastic help, Williams and Davidson were sentenced to hard labor in the penitentiary at New Westminster. Williams got 2 years and Davidson got 3. Peacock scuttled back to his wife and family in Vancouver and died there, well regarded, in 1928. I sat back in my chair, considering everything I'd learned. Another case solved, another artifact identified and properly cataloged. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to celebrate. I'd uncovered a dark tale of deceit, greed, and betrayal. I'd added to our collection, but there was an empty space on the archive shelf of my soul, one marked Faith in Humanity. I poured myself another drink. Outside my office window, the street lights shone onto the traffic on 2nd Avenue, and a city that knew how to keep its secrets. All I could do was thank our viewers for watching Cabinet of Curiosity, and ask them to tune in next time. I wasn't holding my breath.